I'd like to introduce y'all to someone that if you came last year, you met Valerie, you heard her. She did a presentation, and I believe it was about fundraising. And she's back to do a little more development and follow with probably our next step after her first presentation. But Valerie is the director of the Community Foundation here in Atlanta. There are 9 of them throughout the U.S., and they work with a lot of nonprofits and all. She's been the director here for 3 years, and she's graciously does a lot of work with nonprofits and development and all. And I'm sure you might get her alerts and stuff from their wonderful organization. It's real resourceful. So if you have it, figure out, come by and let me know, and I'll show you how to sign up for them. Valerie, you can read about her a little more detailed in here, but I'm going to introduce Valerie Porter for y'all.
Can everyone hear me if I use the handheld mic? Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Brenda for that very nice introduction. I am the daughter and the granddaughter of a deacon and superintendent of Sunday school. So I'm used to this platform here as opposed to the pulpit. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to stay here. Is that fine? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to be with you last year when I was here. Before Linda and Paul leave, I want to wave a big hello and blow kisses. It's so good to see both of you. Thank you so much for coming. I'm sorry, hugs are requisite. Okay, so how is everyone? You've been here all day. You've been talking about your cause. This is like a pep rally from what I remember last year in America. So everyone's like excited. My first 2 rows are smiling at me, but everybody else, are you excited? Very good. Okay, now we're going to talk about the ominous but wonderful topic of your board and fundraising. How many of you work with your boards on a regular basis? How many of you love working with your boards on a regular basis? Very, very good, very good. A few hands went down, but overall, that's a great sign. Just to tell you a little bit more about me, Brenda told you I was the director of the Foundation Center. I have been here in Atlanta for 20 years. Georgia Tech brought me here, so I'm a Georgia Tech girl. Started in nonprofit, which my parents completely did not understand after studying engineering. But I loved it, and I've loved every minute of it. And I especially love fundraising, which puts me in a 0.5% minority of the people in America. But what I've always found, and I think I told you guys this last year, I started out interning for a small arts center. And at that time, they had a program for children that were disadvantaged living in Techwood homes. And there was a little boy named Elam. And Elam aspired to be a curator. And he was the littlest one in the group. He was about 8 years old. And he came and pulled on my jacket one day. And he said, "Miss Val, I want to be a curator. And I really want to work at the High Museum." And something inside me, for the first time after studying systems and studying workflows and studying calculus and physics, this is what I wanted to study for the rest of my life. How do you get money to flow from here, invested here, for causes like this, so that people can be empowered to live their lives in different ways? Elam went on to do great things, and I'm very, very glad that I was a part of that journey for him. Okay, so this is powerful work. So whenever people think about fundraising, I always think about this is investing for good. So you are the person that is encouraging people to invest their money in solutions, okay? And you're encouraging your board to do the same. Okay, what we're going to talk about today is really the role of your board. And as of right now, I've either managed or directed or been the coordinator for 3 boards. And their role, what they feel they should be doing, versus what's actually in their job description, are always 2 different things. Okay, but it really, really is the responsibility of executive leadership to make sure that that's very clear. Okay, the various ways your board can participate in the fundraising process, which can be a lot of fun. How to overcome board member concerns about fundraising, and tips for strengthening your board, including recruitment and orientation. Now, if any time you can't see the board, just tell me, do this, and I'll move out the way, okay? And we can make this very, very informal and very interactive. So when I ask questions, feel free to just jump in, okay? Okay, here we go. Part one, the role of your board. Why are boards so important? Board responsibilities, characteristics of a very effective board. I was very fortunate when I came to the Foundation Center about 3 years ago. Our founding director, Patty Johnson, had built an amazing board. They were presidents of foundations here in Atlanta. They were people that were very civically involved, highly influential, and they loved coming to meetings. They loved seeing each other, and they seemed very receptive to what I was saying. One of the issues we had, though, collectively, is that they didn't feel as mobilized to go out and fundraise on our behalf. Part of that is because they were an advisory board. It wasn't in their mission to do it. They were not a governing board. But the other part of that was, over time, and this is a Foundation Center thing, it's not Patty's fault at all. At the Foundation Center, we had not really encouraged them to do this. So it was interesting, over the last 3 years, we've sort of re-sculpted and rebuilt the board. And they're all highly motivated champions right now. And you really want champions, people that are out there that are talking about your cause. And so fundraising really doesn't become fundraising. It really becomes brand awareness. They're helping people in the community understand who you are, so that it becomes a natural that the folks that want to fund you will start funding you. Okay, I love this definition. A governing board is defined as people elected or appointed to establish policy, exercise fiscal responsibility, and oversee management of an organization. Those last 2 points are very important, and they're points when I've been on boards we've had the most argument about. I was on the Dogwood board, Dogwood Festival. How many of you go to Dogwood Festival or have been at some point? Oh, I've got to do my 30-second commercial. It is one of the best festivals in the state of Georgia. We have it at Piedmont Park every year, and you just remember when the dogwoods bloom, come to Georgia and come to the Dogwood Festival. It's one of our largest, and it was so contentious because the fiscal responsibility piece and the oversight and management piece were very skewed. The board had gotten into the day-to-day management of the organization. In other words, they got into what tents are we going to have? Who's going to be the sponsor for this particular program? How are we going to market? What groups do we want to market to? Those are the executive director's questions. To come back to the board and say, this is the strategy. That is not for the board to decide. And if the board is encroaching and getting too close on those day-to-day management decisions, then it's a good thing to do some type of board retreat, some type of board strategy, some type of board intervention, so that they're this far away from the organization. Far enough so they understand, and if for whatever reason there's negative press, you're in the newspaper, they're not surprised, but close enough to the organization, or close enough to do that, but far away enough that they're not into your day-to-day. And also, well, let's go to the next slide. Let's look at legal and fiduciary responsibilities, and this includes fundraising. One of the arguments that I hear consistently, and I've been on about 7 boards now, and it's so funny whether you are in a small operation where we're hovered around a heater eating Girl Scout cookies and Kool-Aid, and this has actually happened to me, making decisions on behalf of a small nonprofit, or you're sitting in a large boardroom at Georgia Tech and you're making decisions. This whole notion of fundraising always comes up, and someone invariably asks, I give my time, I give my... How many of you have heard that before? Okay, thank you, thank you. Now, if you haven't heard that, that's wonderful. How many of your boards are giving it 100%? Okay, so everyone on the board is making at least a donation of $1. Okay, okay. A quick insider tip with foundations. And when I used to be a grant maker myself, the first thing we would do is flip to the budget page. We would look at the number of board members, and we would see on average how much the board was giving. And if it seemed very low, I would actually go out to some of the websites and look and see if they had it categorized, say at the $10,000 level, the $5,000 level, $1,000. And I started looking for their board members. I remember one organization had 15 board members. Only 3 of them were listed on their donor list. The biggest question that foundations ask, and this is a very critical one, why am I investing in you if your inner circle isn't investing in you? The best thing you can say is we have 100% board participation. I'm going to tell you a very embarrassing story now. And this is one with my first board appointment. This is the one with the Girl Scout cookies and the Kool-Aid, okay? It's 9 o'clock at night. We're all arguing about the budget. The vice chair of our board gets up in a very patronizing way, goes into her purse, takes out approximately $5 bills, and gives them to each one of the board members that's making the argument that they don't have to give. And just as surely as she put those 5 bills in their hand, she went right back and said, "Thank you for your donation. Thank you for your donation. Thank you for your donation." She said, "Madam Secretary, count us 100% participation on the board." It was, again, one of the most humiliating for them scenes that I had ever seen. But it underscored a point. She said, if you can't afford to give $1 to this board, you don't need to be on this board. If you don't care enough about this board that you could part with $1, you don't need to be on this board. This was a board for an arts criticism publication. Not to say that that's not important. I worked in the arts for years. I believe in it. But you guys are rebuilding people's homes and rebuilding their lives. So it becomes even more of a tragedy when I'm someone in the community and you're asking me to invest, and the people that are stewards, legal, fiscal, managerial stewards of your organization cannot raise their hand and say the same, that this is at least worth $1 to me. And again, people aren't looking for everyone on your organization's board to give $1,000, but they are looking for them to care. So if your attorney on your board is saying, "I gave my services, so that's as good as it gets," it's not good enough. If your accountant is saying, "I'm spending hours and hours and hours," still not good enough. At least do something. $5, $10, $20 to show your vote of confidence. Okay, oversight. And that includes supervision of the chief executive. And this is a very strange place to be. And when I talk to EDs of nonprofits of all different sizes, the biggest thing that they say, if they're having issues, this is the issue. I don't really know what my board chair wants me to do. I don't know that I have a good working relationship with my board chair. If I know the board chair, they'll actually schedule a lunch or dinner with me and say, "Can you tell me, how do I talk to my board chair?" This should be, in an ideal world, a wonderful, wonderful partnership. This is almost like a president-vice president kind of relationship. So if you don't have that, it really, really helps for you either to try to foster it with your current board chair or do a lot of board planning so the next person on deck, you work very well with them. They're also responsible for strategic planning. You're leading it, but they're doing a lot of input into it because they're in the field. And they're responsible for the public face of the organization. So this is outreach and advocacy. I'm going to ask another question. How many of you feel like you've got a great elevator pitch? I think we might have talked about that last time. I love that you're raising your hand consistently. Elevator pitch. Your 3 seconds. So tell me about your organization in 3 seconds. Ma'am, if I had to ask you, tell me about your organization in 3 seconds. Yes. Yes, ma'am. No, that's okay. Okay, all right. I'm going to try this again. Ma'am, 3 seconds. Okay, very good. Sir, 3 seconds. I love that. Very, very good. Very good. All 3 of you, thank you. When I first got to the Foundation Center, I think within the first 2 months, I flew up to New York. I'm part of the senior team. And we had a 2-day retreat where we talked about strategy and budget and marketing and our goals. And everything went very well, and it was swimmingly fine until we got to the elevator pitch. And it took almost 20 people 3 hours to do this one exercise. And what we found is that everybody had a different view of the organization depending on where they were working. And we weren't in concert about what we were doing. We had a very clunky mission statement that talked about philanthropy and giving, but what did that really mean to people? So we walked out, and this is our new elevator pitch. We provide people with the resources they need to change the world. I saw smiles. I love it. Isn't that great? That's the difference between your mission and your elevator pitch. Your elevator pitch should sing. Everyone on your board should know and own your elevator pitch. Otherwise, it could be doing you a severe disservice. When you go to parties or you go to functions or you go to fundraisers, start listening to people when they talk about organizations for which they serve on the board and how they describe those organizations. Sometimes they will go off into tangents that have nothing to do with the organization at all. All of this, believe it or not, can detract from your fundraising efforts because people get a different picture of the organization each time. And so they're not quite sure who you are or what you really want. Ultimately, your elevator pitch in the next couple of sentences should say who you are, make it clear who you're serving, and also make it clear what you want. Okay? Also, the 3 duties of a board: duty of care, which means operating the organization ethically according to the law; duty of loyalty, avoiding any conflicts of interest; and duty of obedience to the mission. I've got a great story on duty of care. There was an executive director that came into our shop, and he said, we really have some issues with the board because we've got a great program for kids. It's a camp program. And we have a major sponsor that wants to underwrite this program. And our board is really jazzed about us picking up this sponsor. But I said no. And I'm looking at him like, wow, okay, so sponsor wants to give $500,000. Your board says yes, you say no. I'm really curious as to why. He said, we run a camp for kids that are burn victims. The company that wants to support us is currently in a lawsuit over a product they have that caused fires. So I don't want that negative PR, and I'm trying to explain to my board that that's not something that we want to do. So when you start recruiting new board members and bringing them on, these are 3 very important things to talk about. Their philosophy and their position on accepting money, from whom and under what circumstances. There are youth groups that I know that categorically refuse to accept any money from alcohol companies, cigarette, tobacco companies, and with good reason. So what are the lines that you would draw in terms of the type of money that would come in and from whom? And is it ever a problem to accept money from certain individuals? Avoiding conflicts of interest is huge as well, because for your fundraising efforts, it can have a very negative impact. You know, if you have an individual that's on your board that's in conflict with what you believe in the philosophy and mission of your organization, that can raise red flags. Okay, let's talk about characteristics of an effective board. I'm so sorry, I'm a little bit challenged here with the PowerPoint. Let's skip to giving money. Okay, important first step to engage in fundraising. External donors will look for board contributions, and should you set a minimum donation amount on your board? This is always a big question, and it causes a big brouhaha every time that I'm either on a board or in an organization that has this question. My personal response to this: there's not an amount that's too low, especially when you're a grassroots organization or you're an organization serving the people. The primary objective is for you to be able to say that you have 100% giving on the board, and then you can talk about the other services: your accountant giving their time, the attorney giving his time, people that are volunteering and raising additional funds. And again, external donors will always look for what are your board contributions. Okay, once all of your board members have made their personal contributions, let's look at what else they can do. One-on-one solicitations. The number one thing board members tell me is that they don't want to do fundraising. And I just had a conversation, it's the cutest conversation, with a woman on Tuesday. We did a small fundraising 101 with a group of small Jewish nonprofits. And she said, my fundraising committee met, and Val, they talked about everything except fundraising. They wanted to plan events. They wanted to have parties. What should I do? Because I just need them to give money. The fundraising committee, usually on a board, left to their own devices, and I've been on one before, will do everything they can to get out of the actual one-on-one solicitation. How many of you actually like to ask people for money? Very good. Yay, you're in that 0.5% minority. Wonderful, wonderful. I normally don't like asking people for money. You know, my brother always jokes on me, and this is 30 years later, I was a horrible Girl Scout. He said, Val, how do you mess that up? They're cookies. Everybody wants them. How come you can't sell them? I mean, I'd come back with a wagon full of cookies and boxes of cookies. But for fundraising, to me, it's a little bit easier because you're not asking people to quote unquote buy anything. You really are, and I love this word, and it's a little bit controversial with some people with fundraising and nonprofits, but you really are asking them to invest in a mission. And if you quantify that mission, it makes it a lot easier. Bear with me, I'm a storyteller, so if I've told this story before, just raise your hand and say, we've been there, done that, don't want to hear it again, and I'll skip. But we had a wonderful event at our center. Often we do Meet the Grant Maker, which means we'll invite 3 to 7 grant makers to come in and talk to nonprofits. This particular Meet the Grant Maker was interesting because the grant makers weren't on the podium. They were on the side of the room, sitting there silently. And we had another presenter from New York. But when people were introducing their organizations, we had 7 on the front row, right here where Kirk is. The first 6 got up and very timidly said, my name is Jane Doe, and I'm with XYZ organization, thank you, and sat back down. And I'm sitting here on the sidelines thinking, wow, this is really a missed opportunity. The 7th woman stood up, and with all the energy she had, she said, my name is, and she said her name. Then she said, I'm with XYZ organization, and we serve the children of Vine City. All of a sudden, every one of us in that room that knew what Vine City was had goosebumps. I volunteered there through my church for 8 years, all throughout my 20s. It is one of the top 3 crack-infested communities in this country, not in the state of Georgia, in this country. The likelihood that a child will get out of that community unscathed is less than 10%. So when she said, we're working diligently to solve this problem, and she defined the stats, she started listing all of them. And when she sat down, there wasn't one person in that room, and the room was packed, it was like standing room only, that was not affected by what she said. Fast forward to the end of the program, all 7 funders on the sidelines jumped up and made a beeline to her. Most irritating part of that day for me, 3 of the 6 clustered in a group and started grumbling about how they just couldn't get funding. Nobody wanted to fund them. I will say this clearly, and my staff says I can be pretty harsh about this. Nobody wants to fund mediocrity. Period. The determining factor between the people that will make it in the 21st century and the people that barely got by in the 20th is passion. If you cannot say what you do with an extreme amount of passion, we can go through all of the logistics and all of the to-do lists and all of the PowerPoint presentations that we want to, but at the end of the day, it is about passion. I say that because one horse can't pull the wagon. If you are the ED and you are infused with a lot of passion, and you have a fleet behind you that's lukewarm, it's not going to work. All of you know, if you pour 1 cup of hot water into a bucket of lukewarm water, what do you have? Lukewarm water. So you got to heat the board up. And a lot of that is your job. You know, I could work for 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and I have in the past. And no matter how much you keep working, I don't know about you guys, but you know, you deplete the inbox, and the inbox just keeps coming up with more stuff. It helps if you get some of that off your shoulders and you start ambassadoring it out to your board. Because most of them are very happy to carry that message, and they can carry it for you very well in places that you can't be. But the key common denominator with all of this is passion. And there has to be passion there in rooms where you are not. So part of the job is having this big pep rally and fundraising pep rally around investment in your organization. You know, this is interesting. The Foundation Center, we always promote having house parties, service clubs, religious organizations, even Elks clubs, junior leagues, getting in front of people and talking about what you do. One of the things that we've learned, though, in the 21st century, you can look to political campaigns, regardless of your affiliation. Gen Y doesn't do as much of this at all. And again, I've been preaching this lesson, I think, for like 18 months now. It's part of my stump speech. But as Gen Y comes into the workforce and gets older, and I now have 2 people on my staff that are young enough to be my children, and that's very, very scary. They don't think the way that I think. And I'm not that much older than them. But they absolutely make decisions with very little loyalty. What does that mean for you? These are the future people that will care about the work that you do. And to what degree are you reaching them with the messages that you have? One of the smartest things that I see EDs doing right now, they stack their staffs generationally. If you go back to your organization and everybody is over 50 or over 40 or even over 30, you might want to reevaluate the next hire. Because you need to get different voices on how people want to be heard and how they want to be reached. I remember I had this slide up, and the 2 members on my staff that were under 30 were back in the back of the room. They were supposed to be auditing so they could teach the class later. And they were making faces. And I said, guys, I was on slide X. You were making faces. Why? They said, what's a house party? We don't do house parties. We do meetups. I said, what in the world is a meetup? Then it was welcome to Twitter, welcome to Facebook, welcome to Reality Val. So think about your board and the people that you're serving and where they might be. This has been traditionally what we've done to organize and mobilize, but it doesn't mean that it's what we have to keep doing. Okay, I love this slide. Reality check, you are not alone. And you really aren't alone because you have so many peers in this room that are doing the exact same thing that you're doing. Call on each other for great ideas. I'm sure you have some kind of like listserv or board where you all connect. Am I correct? You have monthly conference call. Very good. Do you share fundraising ideas on that call? You do. Okay, very good. So I'll skip this because you have a wonderful community. But oftentimes, a lot of nonprofit directors feel like they are completely siloed. And make sure that you don't feel siloed. Okay. Yes, sure. It's a very appropriate way. The question is, do you want to create a tangible amount of money that would go specifically towards something that you articulate? For example, if you give $100, it would help serve X number of children or X, it would do X for a family. Am I correct? Right, right. That's actually a wonderful way of fundraising and a way to make your causing your case. We call it sort of quantifying and qualifying what the gift can actually do. Yes, yes, yes. It's a very, very effective way of doing things. And also, too, it's twofold. One, you're giving the gift and the person knows exactly where the gift is going. But it's also raising awareness about what it takes to actually build a house, what it takes to actually accomplish your goal. Because a lot of times, and we actually had that question on Tuesday, there was a man that was, he had an event that he ran for a bunch of high school kids that were somewhat ashamed of their cultural identity. So he invited all of them to come do a lock-in and spend the night at this amazing place. It's like sort of like Dave and Buster's for kids. And he said, but the problem is the parents don't understand how much it's costing me personally to do this. He said, it's about $10,000, and my wife and I foot half of that bill every single year. And I said, well, then you need to really quantify how much money it takes for each child to go through this program. And then ask if there's someone that wants to sponsor a child, someone that wants to sponsor 10, or is there somebody that wants to buy out one of the major high schools so that entire high school can come. So yes, I mean, thinking about that very, very creatively is a great idea. That's a good question. Cringe. Yeah. You know what? Yes, sure. Is there ever a number that makes people cringe? A number that you probably don't want to put in a letter? When I worked at Woodruff Arts Center, they were very good at this, quite stealth. And they would put people in 2 categories, and I highly recommend that. You know, up to about $1,000, and this was for us. That was considered to be a donor or someone part of the individual campaign. So we would do a minimal amount of research to find out what they would be comfortable giving, and we put the ask in the letter. We didn't leave it up to them. So we did a very personalized letter that would say, you know, dear Jane Doe, could you please consider giving $100? Because we knew Jane Doe had the capacity to give it. She had given it to other organizations. Over $1,000, we always had the conversation one-on-one. And we gauged, and we would say, you know, this is our need here at $10,000. This is our need here at $20,000. And we let them gravitate towards something that sort of resonated with them. And then we would start talking about the dollar amount. But for most organizations, anything over $1,000 is major donor. And that's kid skin gloves. Very rarely do you get something in the mail asking you for $5,000 or $10,000, unless you're just really in that ballpark. But I will tell you a quick story about under-asking, which, you know, that's just as deadly as over-asking. When I first started at the Woodruff, I was in prospecting. So you were trying to find new donors for our division. And I used to go to lunch with a really nice lady, you know, she was about my age. She had a couple of kids at the time. And we just used to do lunch, and she would tell me about the Atlanta community. Then she finally said, I want you to meet Nana. And I said, okay, great. You want me to meet your grandmother? I didn't quite understand. She's like, yeah, Nana would really like you. You should tell Nana what you're telling me about what you're doing. And I said, okay. Come to find out, Nana was the sole surviving niece of Robert Woodruff. Everyone knows Robert Woodruff, most famous CEO of Coca-Cola. Okay? And he had no children. So she was the recipient of quite a bit of that money. And so we sat down, the senior team, and we decided that we would engage Nana. And then we said she would come over for lunch. And I said, let's ask Nana for $100,000. And I had done a lot of research, what little I could find. This woman really lived under the radar. My president balked. She said, there's no way we're going to ask someone for the first time for 6 figures. That is insanity. We're not doing it. Right up until the lunch with Nana, I was still walking around with a pad of pink Post-its saying, I think we should up the ask. I think we should up the ask. Really, President Meyer, I think we should up the ask. They got into the meeting with Nana. They asked for $20,000. Nana wrote a $20,000 check and never put her fork down. She patted the president on the hand. Was that all you needed, dear? Our VP, who was in the room, said she didn't even balance the checkbook, Val. I said, well, if you're writing a $20,000 check, I mean, and you don't balance the checkbook, it meant you could have written a $100,000 check. That's what that means. So we under-asked. Very important to do research. So quick commercial for the Foundation Center. We have this database, and it's a free database where you can get that type of research. You can look and see, especially what foundations have given in the past, so you have an idea, ballpark of where you are. Now, how does this appertain to your board? Make sure your board is aware and that they're giving you intelligence on people that are on your list. So if you are thinking, I'm going to ask so-and-so's Nana for $1,000, your board member might know Nana a little bit better than you do and say, no, I think we should bring that down to 500. But those kinds of conversations have to happen in fundraising committee meetings. Okay, turning everything around if you have a board that's really not power forward on raising money. The first thing is dispel fears about money. This is really cultivation, and it's part of their stewardship role to make sure that they're people that are investing in the organization. Engage board members in the planning process. This is very important. And let me just tell you a quick anecdotal story with the Foundation Center. In addition to being director of Atlanta, which serves the Southeast, about 4 months ago, I got a phone call from our president asking me to take over our national and international training efforts. But he said, but you can't drop Atlanta. But can you pick this up, please? And there was an entire fleet with a VP that ran this program before. The biggest conflict that we had, and I don't think my colleague would mind me saying it, was with marketing. VP of marketing came in when I did about 2 or 3 years ago. And she was marketing the program, but she really didn't understand the program. Now, how many of you have worked with people, either on your team or volunteers or community, that wanted to help you, but they didn't quite understand what you did? Really didn't understand, well, we're different from Habitat for Humanity because, and they couldn't answer that question. They were just out selling, out motivating people to give. That's kind of dangerous. People that are your closest circle and your closest advocates really need to be a part of the process. They don't just need to know the end story. Very difficult for them to be champions the way you need them to be champions unless they're part of the process. I'm just as guilty on this one because I live in my head quite a bit. So I do a lot of strategy here. And then, I mean, my staff jokes on me, I'm like Moses. I come down from the mountain, and these are the stone tablets, and you cannot touch them. They are unalterable. You know, that's not the way to move forward with planning, because it's very difficult for someone else to push an agenda that they weren't a part of. So make sure that your board is engaged, they know the process, and I have a trick on getting people to think that my ideas are their ideas. You know, you start off and you put your ideas out there and you say, aren't these great ideas? And everyone says, yes, they are. So now they've bought in. It's really easy. Okay, new board member contract. We started doing this. It's very, very, very effective. How many of you have a job description for your board that's on paper and you give it to your new board members when they come in? Please, you know, if you're on conference calls, this is a great document for you to start sharing. Okay? Board responsibilities should be made very, very clear when people join, and we started rolling those responsibilities into a contract that people sign. That way we're both clear about the expectations. And also, this helps you, if you have to, for any unfortunate reason, let someone go from the board. This is not subjective. There's a breach of contract. Okay? Build fundraising skills through ongoing training. We do a lot of this with the Foundation Center. It's a lot easier sometimes for a third party to come in and say, yeah, everybody should be fundraising, than for you to say it. So if you find yourself in that position where you need a pep rally for your board around fundraising, there are independent consultants and organizations like ours that can help. And the team approach, again, nobody does this alone. I have a couple of board members that are wonderfully effective, but they're effective when they're with someone else. It's very difficult for them to go out and raise money individually. So I usually do a team of us, and that relieves the pressure off of one person. And I always get this, and I've been this person, but I don't want to ask for money. I've always had the convenient excuse when I've been on boards that I work for a nonprofit, so there's a natural conflict of interest that I can't raise money. But for the people that are on the board that say this, here are a couple of ways to get them involved. They can always write thank you letters, especially to the people that they know. And if you've got a batch of thank you letters going out, ask your board, do you know these people that have given? And would you mind writing a reinforcement letter? One of the nicest letters I gave a gift to a very small nonprofit. It was nominal. It's like $25. And there was a young lady who was a volunteer for the organization who wrote a handwritten note about what it meant, and they haven't fallen off of my radar since. I feel obligated every year, because Amelia did that, to continue to give money to them. Those little things on writing thank you letters, especially if it comes from somebody that they remotely know, helps quite a bit. Contribute names to the prospect list. And at Woodruff, they used to be systematic about this. You had to give 10 to 20 people that could be prospected. And also, we have the latitude to use your name. So, for example, Sally said that you might be interested in our mission. Joe said that you might be interested to know more about this program that we're doing. So if they don't want to do the direct ask, can they prospect for you, and can they borrow or can they use your name? Write notes on fundraising letters. That's really easy to do. Cultivate and nurture donor prospects. I have a group of board members that is their primary role, just to talk us up. They never close. They're never going to be the ones to ask for the gift, but they're the ones to make sure that they cultivate the donor. Solicit non-monetary donations. This is a lot easier for some people to do. It's easier for them to ask for tools, space, pro bono time, but very hard for them to ask for money. Support any special events. This should be, again, 100% with board members, unless they have a very, very, very good reason. If you're having a special event, everyone should be there. Advocate for the organization and give time and expertise. Okay, let's talk about tips for strengthening your board. This is one of my favorite topics short of fundraising, is recruiting. How many of you feel like you have a recruiting strategy with your board? Okay. I was really proud of myself when I landed at the Foundation Center, because I looked at the board and I started doing a gap analysis. We had a very strong board. We had a board that was highly engaged, but there were specific kinds of people that we needed. We are a regional entity. Everybody was from the state of Georgia. That meant we needed more regional folks. We were very foundation heavy. We also served nonprofits. We needed some nonprofits on the board. We were very female heavy. We needed more male perspective. We needed males on the board. These are the kinds of questions you really should ask at the beginning of each board recruitment. One of the biggest traps I've seen nonprofits get into is they take a lot of suggestions from people that are on the board without doing the thought of who they need to be on the board to support them. Some of the masters I've seen at this, I've had 2 former bosses that were just incredibly skillful at developing the people that they wanted on their board before board recruitment time. So they were able to talk to each member that was on the nominating committee about, we've got some real holes here, and we need to start filling them with these kinds of people, and so I'm suggesting so-and-so. But this falls on the executive director, and with so much that you have to do, it's very easy to let that slip and to let the board keep evolving itself instead of you taking the lead and saying, this is what we need from the board. Very important for fundraising, because you want to be able to build, at least over time, a strong fundraising board. Okay, so strong commitment to the mission. Yes, ma'am. Did you have a question? Sure. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, good, good. All right, so, okay. I appreciate, thank you so much for that clarity. Okay, let me ask another question. If you do not have an executive director, I'm assuming you're volunteer driven? Okay, I understand now. Okay, so how many of you represent volunteer boards? Okay, all right. I'll ask, I didn't say this preface before, please don't let me drone on for something that's not applicable to you. I don't want to do that, don't want to waste your time. Yeah, okay. Okay. Let's talk about that for a second, because it's not that different, especially if you're here. That means you're probably the more vested of the people on the board. So your responsibility eventually is to, I'm assuming most of the people that are on volunteer boards don't want to volunteer in perpetuity. Are you looking to eventually hire an executive director or have paid staff? No, never. Okay. All right. With that said, then, you're still the people that probably care enough to be here today. So your role de facto is almost an ED role, where you do need to think about how you evolve the board, because the board can very easily evolve even more so with a volunteer board out from under you than it could be if an ED is driving it. So a lot of the questions around the board, what are the board terms? On average, 3 years, 5 years, not counting? Forever. Okay. All right. This is getting more challenging by the moment. Okay. Yeah, see, that kind of scenario can be very, very difficult. Because when you have the same set of people, I mean, my board is, and I love them. I hope they're not within earshot because I don't want them to take this the wrong way. Usually people rotate off the board. And I'm going to try to not take this as they love me. I know they love the Foundation Center, but we haven't had people rotate off. Whenever we give them the option, they're just staying, they're hanging out. So we're starting to get lifers. That's a good thing because you've got loyalty, but you can't consistently have a board that's the same that it was 10 years ago. Again, let's go back to the generational thing, okay? On the generational side of the house, you need some new blood in there because if you don't get the new blood in there, by some chance, you're missing out on entire demographics of people. You know, I went through Diversity Leadership Academy with Coca-Cola, and I believe strongly in diversity. But one of the things that I learned from that is diversity is not always black, white, Latino, male, female. 5 minutes? Okay, thank you. It's not always ethnic. A lot of it has to do with function. Okay, so if you start looking at your board and you are stuck, a lot of the stuck might be you need to bring in different groups that will challenge your thinking. A Gen Y person on your board is really going to challenge your thinking because they're going to tell you, no, this fundraiser you've been doing for 20 years is really nice, but you got a whole group of people with new money that are not remotely interested in that. You need to take this left. So for the volunteer groups, please remember, we can't have the same people for 10, 15 years. Got to diversify. I'm going to move through this because Brenda just gave me 5. Desired skill sets, really think about that. Again, diversity and community representation. Don't make this just check the box. Really think through it. An ability to listen and play well with others. If nothing else sticks, please let this stick. The worst thing you can do is to have somebody fighting against you for 3 years. And it is so much easier to just say no kindly in the beginning than to try to excommunicate them from the fold during their 3-year service. Okay, recruitment, where to find current board members, prospects from existing donors. This is a very stealth competitive tactic, but I've seen it executed very well. You look at other people's board lists and you say, wow, that person would be great. It's pretty easy to do. Prospects from the general population, just check volunteer boards. But again, really vet them and also be very transparent about we're going to need you to do fundraising. Don't let that sneak up on people because it's one of the things that I hear that people hate the most is, oh, I got on this board and now they want me to raise money. No, that should have been clear from the very beginning. Okay, again, commitment, a board contract. Make sure they do an orientation and that there's some kind of evaluation process on how they're doing as a board member.